A millionaire finds his mother kneeling in a humiliating scene at her stepdad's house in tears. What happens next will surprise everyone. Ethan Collins drove towards Springfield on a sunny afternoon, the sunlight filtering through the leaves of the trees, casting a play of light and shadow on the road. The smell of the warm asphalt and the familiar sound of his car wheels cutting through the silence brought a wave of nostalgia. He hadn't seen his hometown in years, and memories of his childhood mingled with the worry that had brought him back. His mother, Mary, had always been his safe harbor, and the thought that something was wrong weighed heavily on him. As he approached the house, Ethan noticed the changes around. The old neighbors had moved away and new houses had sprung up, but the essence of the place still lingered. He stopped in front of the modest red brick house that had been his home for so many years. A mix of happiness and sadness engulfed him. He recalled the afternoons spent playing ball in the yard, the laughter shared as a family, and, most importantly, the moments when his mother would hold him after a tough day. With a deep sigh, Ethan hesitated before ringing the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, and he felt his heart race. What if she isn't well? What if it's worse than I imagine? He thought. The door creaked open and Mary appeared, her face lit by a nervous smile that couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. "Ethan! My God, you're here!" exclaimed Mary, enveloping him in a tight embrace. The warmth of her body and the familiar scent of talc and lavender comforted him momentarily. However, as she pulled away, Ethan noticed that something was different. His mother's expression was not just one of joy. There was a trace of anxiety he couldn't ignore. "Hi, Mom, I've missed you. How are you?" Ethan asked, trying to read the emotions that flashed in her eyes. He perceived that the house, although still holding its essence, felt darker, as if the weight of unspoken secrets hung over it. "I'm fine, just busy with some things," Mary replied, glancing quickly to the side, as if she wanted to avoid the subject. Ethan frowned. The discomfort in her voice left him uneasy. "Mom, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? What's going on?" he insisted, the worry growing in his chest. Mary's expression closed off, and a heavy silence settled between them. Before she could respond, Richard, Mary's new husband, appeared in the living room, interrupting the moment. "Oh, you finally came back, Ethan. We were hoping you'd show up sooner," Richard said with a smile that resembled more of a forced grin. His presence was imposing, and Ethan noticed how his mother's demeanor changed instantly upon seeing him. "Hi, Richard. Good to see you," Ethan replied, but the tone of his voice lacked the same cordiality. He felt a chill in his stomach as he realized how Richard had the ability to make the atmosphere uncomfortable. As they talked, Ethan noticed that Mary became more submissive, avoiding Richard's gaze as if she were trying not to provoke him. "Mary, could you help me in the kitchen? We need to prepare dinner," Richard suggested, not waiting for an answer. He turned to Ethan, a challenging gleam in his eyes. "Ethan, make yourself at home. There's a lot you must have missed around here." Ethan watched as his mother walked away, a shadow of sadness in her gaze. His heart ached. Something was very wrong, and he was determined to find out what it was. The feeling that his visit to Springfield would be more than just a simple reunion began to solidify in his mind. "Mum, I'm going to stay here for a while," he murmured to himself, already prepared to face the secrets that awaited him. Ethan sat at the small dining table, watching his mother, Mary, prepare dinner, while her new husband, Richard, settled into his seat with an air of superiority that made the atmosphere tense. The aroma of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the air, but the discomfort that lingered in the room made the food almost unappetizing. "So, Ethan," Richard began, breaking the heavy silence, "how's life in the big city? It must be easy to forget your roots when you're surrounded by so much wealth and glamour." His voice had a sarcastic tone, as if insinuating that Ethan had abandoned the family. Ethan forced a smile, aware that any response could be used against him. "I work a lot, but I miss Springfield. It's good to be back." He looked at Mary, who was silent, seemingly oblivious to the exchange. Her gaze was distant, and Ethan felt a pang in his heart as he realized that his mother was no longer the strong woman he remembered. "Yeah, you should spend more time here. Your mom needs you," Richard continued, the smile on his face more one of disdain than concern. "Especially now that she's so busy." He shot a significant glance at Mary, who hesitated, as if trying to comprehend what was happening. "I'm fine, Richard," Mary said, her voice trembling. "Ethan just came to visit me, right, dear?" Her gaze sought reassurance from her son, but she seemed lost in a sea of insecurities. "Of course, Mom," Ethan replied, trying to keep calm. "I just want to know how you're doing. It's been a while since we saw each other. He wished she felt free to open her heart, but the tension among the three of them was palpable, like a thread ready to snap. "Well, I hope you've learned not to let emotions get the best of you," Richard interrupted, his challenging gaze fixed on Ethan. "Out there, the world is cruel. Better keep a cool head." He leaned back in his chair, while Ethan felt his anger rising. "I'm not here to discuss what's right or wrong, Richard," Ethan replied firmly. "I'm here because I care about my mum." The determination in his voice made Mary look at him with surprise and hope. "Caring is one thing," Richard said, shaking his head, "but it's not the same as being present. Do you have any idea what it takes to care for someone? It requires commitment, something you clearly lack." I'm just trying to understand what's going on," Ethan responded, feeling more and more pressured. "I didn't come here to create conflict, but it seems like you don't want me here." "Maybe it's because you shouldn't be here," Richard shot back, rising abruptly. "You know nothing about her life now. She needs someone strong, not a son who left and forgot everything." Mary, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. "Richard, please." Her voice was a whisper, but there was tremendous weight in her words. "Ethan is right. I need him here." Before we continue with this gripping story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future tales. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Richard looked at her with disdain. "You don't know what you're doing, Mary. He won't take care of you like I do." The tension in the room was about to explode, and Ethan felt he needed to act. "Mom, you don't have to feel trapped by anyone," Ethan said, trying to meet her gaze. "I'm here to help you, but you need to let me do that." Richard let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, and how do you plan to do that? You haven't even been in Springfield for years." He stared at Ethan as if assessing his courage. "I can start by listening to you, Mom," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I want to understand, and I want you to feel safe. It's your life." He looked at Richard, issuing a silent challenge, while the tension in the room thickened. With tears in her eyes, Mary finally looked at Ethan. "I don't know if I can do this," she murmured, but there was a fragility in her voice that Ethan couldn't ignore. "You're not alone, Mom. You never were," Ethan responded, determined to help her see the truth. "I'm here now. We'll face this together." The scene unfolding between them was charged with emotion, and Ethan knew it was just the beginning of a much larger battle, but he was ready to fight for his mother. Ethan walked through the streets of Springfield, childhood memories flooding his mind like a torrent. It was as if time had stopped in some parts of the city, while in others, the changes were evident. He remembered bike races in the park, adventures with friends, and more recently, the despair of realizing that his mother was in a complicated situation. Reuniting with Emily, his old flame, wasn't just a matter of nostalgia. It was a chance to understand the ties that still bound them, even after all these years. After several attempts, Ethan finally found Emily at the local cafe, a place that used to be their hangout. Upon entering, his attention was immediately drawn to her, sitting at a table near the window, absorbed in a book. When she heard the bell of the door chime, Emily looked up, and a smile illuminated her face. "Ethan, it's been so long." She stood up and hugged him warmly, as if no time had passed. "Hi, Emily. I wasn't sure what it would be like to see you again. Springfield feels different, but you're still the same," he said, looking into her eyes, trying to grasp the essence of the woman he had left behind. "Oh, you too. What brought you back?" Emily asked as they both took their seats, and she set the book aside. "My mum. I'm worried about her. All I know is that she's not doing well," Ethan replied, the seriousness of his words making the atmosphere around them feel heavier. Emily frowned, her expression showing genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. I've heard rumors about her situation. Richard, he's not a good person, right?" Ethan nodded, recalling the tense interactions he had with Richard. "He has a controlling aura over her. It's like she's always trying to please him, but at the same time she seems so lost." "I feel that way too," Emily confessed, breaking the barrier of vulnerability between them. "My marriage isn't what I expected. I feel trapped." She sighed, looking out the window, as if the world outside could offer an escape. Ethan stared at the table, pondering her words. "Have you thought about changing that? About seeking something different?" He knew the question was risky, but he needed to understand if she was willing to fight for her freedom too. "Of course, every day, but it's complicated. Sometimes we feel like we have no choice. And when you have kids, the situation becomes even more delicate," Emily replied, her gaze still fixed on the street. Silence settled for a moment as they both reflected on the choices they had made over the years. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I can't let my mom stay like this. I need to understand more about Richard. Would you join me in this?" "Of course," Emily said, determination rising in her voice. "I'll always be by your side. Let's uncover the truth." The two began investigating Richard's life, talking to neighbors and old friends, trying to understand the man who had become a stranglehold on Mary's life. In one of their conversations with a childhood friend, they discovered that Richard was not just a controlling man. There were rumors of a history of abusive relationships. "I heard he's had problems with his ex-wives. It's a pattern, you know. He has this way of seducing, but then he becomes possessive and aggressive," as the friend revealed, looking around as if she feared Richard was listening. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. "We need to do something about this. If he's done it before, he can do it again. We can't let my mom stay in this situation." Emily agreed, her expression resolute. "We need to gather all the information we can. It's time to act." "Mary deserves more than this. You deserve more than this." With renewed determination, Ethan and Emily continued their search, fully aware that they needed to act quickly to protect Mary and perhaps themselves. The past had returned to haunt them, but together they were ready to confront the echoes of their unresolved stories. Ethan sat at a table in the small bar in town, surrounded by childhood friends who had gathered to support him. The atmosphere was cozy, but the tension was palpable. As he looked at the familiar faces, he remembered the laughter and fun they used to have together. Now everything felt different. The worry for his mother consumed his thoughts, and with a deep sigh, he began to share his anguish. "I can't understand how she could let someone like Richard take over her life," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "He's arrogant and controlling. I feel like my mum is trapped, but I don't know how to help her." Lucas, one of his closest friends, nodded, his eyes filled with concern. "Ethan, you have to know that it's not just you who's worried. We all feel that something's wrong. Richard has never been a good person. He's always had this way of intimidating others." "He's always been a jerk," Clara, a longtime friend, added. "I remember how he acted at school. Nobody liked him, but his mother seemed convinced he was the right man." What happened to her to accept that? Ethan felt a lump in his throat. She's always been so strong. How could she let herself be taken in by someone like that? It's like I've lost my mother to a stranger. "You're not alone in this, Ethan," Lucas said firmly. "We're here for you. If you find out more about Richard, maybe we can do something about it." The group spent the next few minutes sharing stories about Richard, each person recounting their experiences and fears. However, it was when an old friend, Tiago, decided to open his heart that the atmosphere grew even heavier. "I've known Richard for years," Tiago began, looking down at the beer glass on the table. "He's not just arrogant, he's dangerous. I remember once when he hit a girlfriend. Nobody had the courage to report it. He always had this way of imposing himself, you know. People are afraid of him." Ethan felt his blood boil. "What do you mean no one did anything? That's unacceptable. At the time, we were all young and scared of the consequences, but now you have to do something." "You can't let this slide," Tiago said, his voice steady. Tiago's words echoed in Ethan like a call to action. He looked at his friends, realizing they shared the same desire to protect Mary. "If Richard is what you say he is, then I need to confront him. I can't stand by while my mother suffers." "But how are you going to do that?" Clara questioned, concern lacing her voice. "He can be aggressive." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling determination swell within him. "I don't know, but I need to find out more. If he really has a history of violence, maybe we can use that to our advantage. I want my mother to know she's not alone, that she has support." The friends exchanged glances, a sense of hope beginning to rise among them. "We'll help," Lucas said, gripping Ethan's arm. "If you need information, we'll find it. We can't let Richard destroy your mother." "Exactly," Clara agreed. "Together we're stronger, and if Richard is as bad as you say, he won't be able to hide forever." The conversation continued, filled with plans and strategies, as Ethan felt more empowered by the presence of his friends. They were ready to face whatever was necessary. The weight he carried in his heart began to dissipate, replaced by a new hope and determination. Deep down he knew the fight was just beginning, but now he wouldn't be alone. Ethan walked through his childhood home, his heart heavy with the emotional burden each room carried. The smell of aged wood and the walls adorned with photographs transported him back to a time when happiness seemed to be the only option. He remembered the laughter, the games in the yard, and the stories his mother told before bed. But now, all of that felt distant, overshadowed by the dark reality unfolding before him. As he searched the living room, Ethan noticed a dusty box on a shelf. He pulled it down carefully and opened it, finding a collection of yellowed letters. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, he began to read. The handwritten words, filled with love, were from his late father. "Mary, my love, every day I spend by your side is a gift," one of the letters began. His father spoke about hopes, dreams of a united family, and a bright future. Reading brought tears to Ethan's eyes, but it also ignited a sense of determination within him. "If he believed in us, then I can believe too," he murmured to himself, closing his eyes for a moment. He remembered the tense conversation he had with Richard the night before, the disdain and arrogance the man exhibited. That was not the life his mother deserved. With the letters still in hand, he decided it was time to act. Ethan went downstairs to the kitchen, where Mary was washing dishes. The sound of running water felt almost therapeutic, but her expression was one of worry. "Mom," Ethan began, his voice gentle. "We need to talk." She turned, hesitation in her eyes. "About what, dear?" "About you and Richard. I feel like you're trapped by him in some way, and that worries me." Mary hesitated, drying her hands on the dish towel. "Ethan, it's not that simple. I know it's not. But you need to tell me what's going on. I want to help you." He sat at the table, the tension between them palpable. "Please, tell me the truth." Mary looked at the floor, as if searching for the words somewhere in the tiles. "Richard, he's not who he seems. At first everything seemed perfect. He was kind, attentive, but over time the truth started to show." Her voice trembled, and Ethan felt his heart ache. He became controlling. "Sometimes I feel like I don't have a voice anymore." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to absorb the pain in his mother's words. "Mum, you need to tell me more. What does he do? What are you afraid of?" He has a way of manipulating situations, making it seem like I'm to blame, and I'm scared, Ethan. Scared that if I try to leave, he'll do something terrible." Tears streamed down Mary's face, and Ethan immediately went to her. "You don't have to be scared, Mom. I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you." He held her hands, trying to convey strength and security. "Together, we can find a way out." Mary looked into her son's eyes, and for the first time, hope began to flicker in her weary gaze. "Would you really do that for me? Would you confront Richard?" "Yes, I would. It's time to put an end to this. We need to plan. We need a way to expose who he really is." Ethan felt determination swell within him, fueled by the letters from his father and the love he felt for his mother. "You're not alone in this." She hesitated, conflict clear on her face. "What if he gets angry? What if he tries to retaliate?" "Mary, it's time for you to stop living in fear. Richard can't keep controlling your life. You're stronger than you think." He stepped back a little, looking at the table where his father's letters still lay. "These letters show that love is stronger than fear, and I know you can find that love within yourself too." Mary took a deep breath, the tension in her body beginning to ease. "I'll try, Ethan. I'll try to open up to you, but I need time to prepare." "I'll be here whenever you're ready," Ethan replied, a hopeful smile spreading across his face. Stepfather'S, the connection between them, once weakened by years and circumstances, was beginning to be rebuilt. Ethan knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but now there was a path, and he was determined to walk it alongside his mother. Ethan sat at the kitchen table watching his mother, Mary, who stood with trembling hands resting on the countertop. The atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension, and the smell of the simple pasta dish she had prepared seemed to have lost all its flavor. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light that illuminated Mary's face, but it was not enough to dissipate the shadow of worry that hung over them. "Mary," Ethan began, his voice choked with emotion, "I need you to be honest with me. What's going on between you and Richard? I feel like you're trapped with him." Mary looked away, her face pale and tense. "Ethan, it's not that simple. Richard, he takes care of me. He gives me security." "Security?" Ethan repeated, feeling frustration building inside him. "You call this security? I've seen how he treats you. That's not love, Mum. It's control." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to muster courage. "I'm afraid of him, Ethan, but I'm also afraid of being alone. Richard, he has his ways of making me feel like I need him." "But you don't need him. You're a strong woman, Mom. You always have been," Ethan insisted, rising from the table and taking a few steps toward her. "It just seems like now you've let this consume you. I want you to know I'm here to help. We can find a way out together." Mary shook her head, tears starting to slide down her cheeks. You don't understand. He's not just any man. He knows things about me, about us. If I try to leave him, I don't know what he might do. He's threatened me before." Ethan felt a chill in his stomach hearing those words. "Threatened? What do you mean?" "Mom, you need to tell me everything. We can't leave it like this. I can't be here without knowing what's really happening." Mary took a deep breath, her voice faltering as she spoke. "Ethan, I don't want to involve you in this. You have your life. You're successful, and I don't want you to get hurt because of me. I don't care what he might do. I care about you, and I want you to be happy. We can't keep living like this in fear," he said, his voice becoming more resolute. "Please, Mom, trust me." She looked into her son's eyes, and for the first time he saw a spark of determination. "You've always been my pride, Ethan. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to face this." "You're not alone. You never have been," Ethan affirmed, stepping closer to her and holding her hands. "Together we can find a way out of this. You have a secret stash, right? Some money Richard doesn't know about?" Mary hesitated, but then slowly nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, but it's not enough. I can't just take it and leave. He would be furious." "Then we need a plan," Ethan said, his heart racing. "If you don't feel safe leaving the house, we need to expose Richard so he no longer has control over you. Let's talk to some people, seek support. You don't have to face him alone." "Ethan, Mary started to protest, but the determination in her son's gaze made her hesitate. The idea of finally having someone by her side, someone who believed in her, began to break down the barriers she had built over the years. "I'm here to protect you, Mum. It's time to reclaim our lives. It's time for you to regain your freedom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll do this together. You don't have to be afraid." Mary felt the weight of her fears beginning to lift, even if just a little. The connection that had been lost between mother and son was starting to be restored, and hope, a small yet intense flame, began to glow in her heart. "Do you really think we can do this?" she asked, vulnerability in her voice almost breaking Ethan. "Yes, I believe so, and I will fight for you. That's a promise," Ethan replied, holding her hands tighter, determined not to let anything tear them apart again. The tension hung in the air as Ethan prepared to confront Richard. His heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. In the living room, Mary watched from a distance, her expression a mix of anxiety and hope. The atmosphere was charged with oppressive silence, only broken by the sound of the clock on the wall, which seemed to count down the moments leading to the inevitable confrontation. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped forward, facing Richard, who sat on the couch with his usual arrogance etched on his face. "We need to talk, Richard," Ethan said, his voice firm but controlled. Richard looked at him with a disdainful smile, crossing his arms. "About what exactly, Ethan? About how you abandoned your mother and your hometown, or about how you live in a fantasy world, far away from the people who actually care about you?" Richard's provocation hit like a blow, but Ethan didn't let it shake him. He knew he had to stay calm. "I care about my mother, and that's exactly why I'm here," Ethan replied, looking Richard in the eye, challenging him to back down. "I know you manipulate her, that you keep her trapped in a life that isn't hers. People are starting to realize who you really are." Richard let out a sarcastic laugh, standing up from the couch and advancing toward Ethan. "And what are you going to do about it? You don't know anything about me or her life. You're just a rich kid who came back home thinking you can fix everything with a few speeches." Arrogance oozed from his words, but Ethan was determined not to be intimidated. "If you think I'm going to stay silent while you destroy my mother's life, you're very mistaken," Ethan replied, his voice now louder, echoing through the house. "She doesn't deserve this. No one deserves to live in fear." He felt the adrenaline pumping, but also the certainty that he was fighting for something much bigger than himself. Mary watched the scene with her heart racing, torn between fear of what might happen and hope that her son could truly free her. Seeing Ethan's determination, something inside her began to break. It was time to act. Richard, sensing the change in the atmosphere, advanced even further, trying to intimidate. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, kid. I'm the man taking care of her now. You have no power here." Richard's tone was threatening, but Ethan didn't back down. He stood firm, facing his stepfather. "You can try to intimidate me, but I am not afraid of you. What you do to her is unacceptable. You are not a husband. You are an oppressor." Ethan's words were like a sharp blade, cutting through Richard's facade of confidence. The tension escalated, and Mary, finally moved by her son's courage, decided to intervene. "Richard, that's enough," her voice rang out, firm and resolute. "I can't live like this anymore. I am afraid of you, but I cannot stay silent any longer." Mary's declaration made Richard stop, rage flooding his face. "You are making a big mistake, Mary," Richard said, the venom in his words evident. "You have no idea what you're doing. You will regret this." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine at the threat, but he held his ground. "No, Richard, the one who will regret this is you," Ethan declared, his voice stronger than ever. "The truth always comes to light, and I will not allow you to keep hurting my mother." Ethan's determination was palpable, and for the first time, Mary saw a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness that surrounded her. As the tension mounted in the room, the atmosphere of oppression began to transform into something more powerful. Ethan was ready to fight, not just for himself, but for Mary and the freedom she deserved. He was not alone. The courage emanating from his mother encouraged him to continue, even in the face of Richard's imminent threat. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Ethan would never be the same. He was willing to confront the past, and the truth, no matter how painful, was finally beginning to unfold. The tension in Mary's house was palpable. After days of silence and fear, the revelation that Ethan's mother was about to make could change everything. Sitting at the kitchen table with the aroma of fresh coffee in the air, Ethan watched his mother, noticing the deep bags under her eyes. Her gaze, once empty, now carried a mix of determination and vulnerability. "Ethan, I never told you about the fund I created," Mary began, her voice trembling. She hesitated as if weighing each word. "Richard never knew I had a secret savings account." Ethan furrowed his brow, surprised. "A secret account? Why didn't you mention this before? You can use that money to get out of this situation." "I didn't know if he would find out. He's always been so controlling. I was afraid that if he knew, he would do something to stop me from accessing it," Mary replied, her hands trembling slightly on the table. "But at the same time, I didn't know if I could leave it all behind. Richard has a way of making me feel like I'm nothing without him." "You don't need to feel that way, Mom. You are strong and deserve to be happy," Ethan said, his voice firm. "If you have that money, we can plan something. We can get out of this situation together." Mary looked at her son, tears in her eyes. "Ethan, I don't want you to put yourself in danger. Richard is not just a controlling man. He is dangerous. I don't want you to suffer because of me." "But I'm already suffering watching you like this," Ethan replied, frustration evident in his voice. "I can't just stand by while you live under his control. We need to act." Mary took a deep breath, the tension between them almost palpable. "If I tell you everything, you promise you won't do anything without consulting me first? Richard is cunning, and if he finds out you're planning anything, it could be dangerous." "I promise, Mom. But we need to be smarter than him. We need a plan. You can tell me everything you know about him, and together we'll do something," Ethan insisted, looking into her eyes, trying to convey confidence. "Richard is not just a controlling husband," Mary began, her voice now calmer though still trembling. "He has a history. When we met, he was charming, but after a while his true side started to show. He has had previous relationships where the women were left with nothing. I am just the latest." "How do you know this?" Ethan questioned, his mind racing with the idea that Richard had a dark history. "A friend of mine knew one of his ex-wives. She told me that Richard had a pattern of behavior. Women felt isolated and controlled. After they left, he made a point of getting revenge," Mary explained, her voice tense. "I didn't want to believe it. I always thought our love was different. You need to understand that it's not your fault, Mom. He manipulated you. But now, with this account, we can use it to our advantage. You can leave this relationship and start over," Ethan said, excited by the possibility. Mary looked at her son, hope beginning to blossom in her heart. "Do you really think we can do this? I'm so scared." "Yes, we can, and we won't be alone. Emily and my friends are willing to help. We just need a solid plan," Ethan replied, his gaze steady. "If Richard finds out that I'm planning something, he could become even more violent," Mary warned, her expression troubled. "But at the same time, this account is the only thing giving me a bit of hope. Let's use that hope. I'll talk to Emily and see what we can do. We'll do this together, Mom. I'm not just here for a visit. I'm here to fight for you," Ethan declared, his determination growing. With a new sense of purpose, they began discussing strategies, knowing that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But for the first time in years, Mary felt that she was no longer alone. The town square of Springfield was bustling with life. The food stalls and the smiles of children contrasted sharply with the tension Ethan felt in his chest. He had decided that today would be the day he revealed the truth about Richard, and the pressure was almost unbearable. The community event promised to bring the town together in a spirit of celebration, but for Ethan, it was an emotional battlefield. He positioned himself in front of the microphone, feeling the curious and skeptical gaze of the crowd. Beside him, Emily squeezed his hand, giving him some of the strength he so desperately needed. Ethan's childhood friends were scattered throughout the audience, all wearing expressions of support and understanding. "You can do it, Ethan. We're all with you," Emily whispered, and he nodded, taking a deep breath. "Good afternoon, everyone," Ethan began, his voice trembling slightly. "Today I'm here to talk about something that has been tormenting me for a long time. It's about a man many of you know, Richard." The murmurs in the crowd grew, and Ethan felt the weight of their expectations. "I think it's time to expose some truths that have been hidden for too long." He looked out at the audience, seeing familiar faces, and remembered the stories he had heard, the whispers about Richard, the worried glances, and the feelings of helplessness. "Richard is not just my mother's husband. He is a man with a pattern of abuse that can no longer be ignored." "You're crazy, Ethan. Richard would never do that," shouted a voice from the crowd, and Ethan saw a group of Richard's supporters in front. His heart raced, but he didn't let it shake him. "I understand that many of you have an image of him that has been carefully constructed, but I'm not here to attack a man. I'm here to protect the woman I love, my mother." The tension heightened, and Ethan stepped forward, his determination growing. "Richard has been reported for violence in previous relationships. I have evidence, testimonies from women who suffered at his hands." He pulled out a folder of documents that he had prepared with great care. "These are not just words. They are stories that need to be heard." "You need to stop this," shouted a woman in the crowd, apparently a friend of Richard. "This is slander." Her voice resonated, but Ethan kept his gaze steady. "Slander or truth?" He opened the folder and showed some photos. "These are photos of injuries from a former wife. I spoke to her and she told me everything. The control, the fear, the manipulation. It's time to put an end to this cycle of silence and shame." The murmurs in the crowd began to shift. Eyes met and disbelief turned into curiosity. "I know many of you have your doubts about me and what I'm saying, but I am not the only one speaking out. Here are testimonies from friends and family who witnessed what happened." He pointed to a group of people who stood ready to share their stories. "I am a long-time family friend," began a woman, her voice trembling but firm. "I saw the change in Mary. Richard isolated her and I never knew how to help. Ethan is right. We need to talk about this." The audience began to pay attention, and Ethan felt the energy shift. "I have a story too," said a man from the back, raising his hand. "I was Richard's co-worker at a company years ago. He wasn't just arrogant, he was intimidating. He took out his anger on anyone around him. That was not normal. The atmosphere was changing, and Ethan realized that doubt was dissipating. Seizing the moment, he continued, "These women and men who stood up here today have courage. They are here to support my mother, and to ensure that Richard faces the consequences of his actions. We can no longer be afraid to speak the truth." When he finished, silence fell for a moment, but soon after, a wave of applause began to spread through the square. Most of the crowd was starting to believe, to unite around the truth. Ethan looked at Emily, who smiled with pride, and at his friends, who were nodding in approval. The fight was just beginning, but now he knew he wasn't alone in this battle. The tension was thick in the air, palpable and suffocating, as the living room became an emotional battleground. Richard, with eyes blazing with fury, advanced toward Ethan, his body rigid and threatening. The young businessman, without hesitation, planted his feet firmly on the ground, staring down the man who had become the embodiment of everything his mother feared. "You won't intimidate me, Richard. Enough with the lies and games." Ethan's voice echoed in the room, imbued with a determination he never knew he possessed. Mary, positioned behind her son, felt a wave of courage rising within her. Ethan's presence at her side seemed to ignite a flame she believed had long since extinguished. "Ethan, be careful," she shouted, her heart racing, but at the same time, a part of her was ready to stand with her son. Richard, on the other hand, scoffed at the threat Ethan posed. "You're just a spoiled kid, Ethan. You don't understand anything about real life. Your mother needs me, and you are nothing but a killjoy." "I am everything she needs right now," Ethan shot back, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. You don't love her, you control her. And that ends here. The room seemed to shrink around them, the energy of confrontation growing with each passing second. Richard, realizing he was losing control, shot a cold, calculating look at Mary. Do you really want this, Mary? Do you want to stand by this boy and live on memories, or do you prefer the security I offer? The question, laden with manipulation, made Mary's heart waver. But looking at Ethan, she saw the unwavering determination etched on her son's face. I am no longer afraid of you, Richard, Mary asserted, her voice trembling but firm. No more living by your rules. With that, the atmosphere shifted. Richard, sensing his manipulation was failing, lunged forward, desperation driving him to act irrationally. You don't know who you're dealing with, he shouted, attempting to strike Ethan. But Mary, in a moment of pure bravery, stepped between them. No, you will not hurt my son. Her words rang like a war cry, echoing through the house and revealing the strength she had finally found. At that moment, the sound of sirens began to approach, and one of Ethan's friends, who had been outside the house, noticed the critical situation and decided to act. I called the police, he shouted, entering the room. Richard, you better step away. His entrance brought a new level of security, and the presence of authority began to loom. Richard, realizing his control was crumbling, hesitated. This isn't what you think. You can't do this to me. He tried to defend himself, but his words were laced with panic, and the mask of control he had always worn was starting to crack. The police finally arrived, and the officers entered the room, ready to intervene. Hands up, we're here to investigate a possible case of domestic violence, one of the officers ordered, while others moved toward Richard. This is a mistake, I didn't do anything, Richard screamed, trying to dodge, but authority prevailed. With swift movements, the officers handcuffed him, and the truth, finally exposed, began to echo throughout the house. Mary and Ethan exchanged glances, a mix of relief and disbelief on their faces. We did it, Ethan whispered, as tears streamed down his mother's face. Yes, we did it, she replied, her voice choked. The weight that had hovered over them for so long, suffocating, began to In the epilogue, the town came together for a community event, celebrating the courage of Mary and Ethan. Amidst the smiles and hugs, Ethan turned his gaze to Emily, who was there, reflecting on her own choices. Are you ready to change your life too? He asked softly. Emily smiled, hope shining in her eyes. Yes, I am. It's time for me to seek my freedom. And so, in the heart of Springfield, despite the scars of the past, love and courage began to weave a new future, where the echoes of the past became just memories of a battle overcome. We've reached the end of this touching story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more tales like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Right now there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to keep watching these moving stories, just click on it to start. And now, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and leave a like to support our work. Now for a sincere question. Do you agree with what happened in the story? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until the next video.